The card is sitting on the kitchen table when I get home. It's a Christmas card, red envelope, slightly water-stained at the corner. My name written on the front in handwriting I haven't seen in 4 years. The stamp is from 1987. My grandfather has been dead for 11 months. I'm standing in the entryway of the apartment I share with my 73-year-old grandfather's sister, a woman my family calls the burden, and the December air is still coming off my coat, and my hands are very still. I don't open it yet. I set my keys on the hook by the door, the one I drilled into the wall myself using a second-hand drill and a YouTube tutorial, because everything in this apartment I have learned to do myself. I walk to the window that faces the parking lot 3 floors below. The lot is half empty. Someone's left their headlights on. A thin skin of ice is forming on the windshields. I look at the card. I don't open it. Welcome to Calm Revenge Tales. My name isn't important. What happened is, if you've ever been told you were the problem for refusing to abandon someone, stay with me. Subscribe if you want to see how this ends, because it ends precisely. I am a paralegal, not a lawyer. I want to be exact about that because exactness matters in this story. I work at a firm in Duluth, Minnesota, that handles estate law primarily. Wills, trusts, probate disputes, the slow and legal unwinding of what people leave behind. I've been there 6 years. I earn $52,000 a year. I pay my own rent, my own student loans, $287 a month for years left, my own groceries, my own car insurance. I did not inherit anything to get here. I built it hour by hour, shift by shift, by being the person in the office who remembered the details that other people forgot. The overlooked person in this story is Dottie Vasilchuk. That's my grandfather's younger sister. She is 73, 4'11", and the best maker of beet borscht I have ever encountered in my life. She grew up in the same house as my grandfather Marek, in a part of Minnesota where Ukrainian families had settled after the war, and she never married and she never had children, and after Marek died she had no one. My family's relationship to Dottie was a kind of low-grade cruelty disguised as logistical inconvenience. She was mentioned at holiday dinners the way weather is mentioned, briefly, dismissively, and then set aside. My mother called her the situation. My Aunt Renata called her Marek's project. My Uncle Bogdan, who is the kind of man who laughs at his own jokes before he's finished them, called her the drain. I called her every Sunday. I had been calling her every Sunday since I was 19, which was the year I visited her for the first time alone, and she taught me how to make her borscht, slow-roasted beets, a knuckle of pork, dill added at the very end, never before. And I understood in the particular way you understand things at 19 that she was one of the most interesting people I had ever met. She had opinions about architecture. She had been following a specific Ukrainian chess grandmaster since 1974. She kept a notebook where she wrote down sentences from books that had surprised her, and sometimes she read them to me over the phone slowly so I could write them down too. My family did not know any of this about her. The invitation came in October, 2 months before Christmas. My mother called on a Tuesday evening. She always called on Tuesday evenings, which I had long understood to be the slot in her week where obligation lived, and she told me that the family was gathering at her house on Christmas Day. The whole family. Aunt Renata and her husband Tomas, Uncle Bogdan and his wife Celeste, the cousins. And she added in a tone that communicated significant self-congratulation, they were going to include Dottie this year. I asked what include meant. She said Dottie was welcome to come as long as she didn't need a ride, didn't need a special meal, and didn't make things uncomfortable, the way she had at Marek's funeral when she'd cried, which my mother described as a bit much for the room. I wrote down the conditions in my notebook while my mother was still talking, not because I needed to remember them, because writing things down is how I slow myself enough to decide carefully. Dottie had not driven since 2019. She lived 40 minutes from my mother's house. She had mild lactose issues that required a minor adjustment to one side dish. And she had cried at her brother's funeral. I told my mother I would drive Dottie. I would handle her food. And I was very confident Dottie would not make anyone uncomfortable. What I did not say, I had a feeling about this gathering. A specific physical feeling low in my sternum like pressure before weather changes. I had been feeling it since Marek died in January, since the way my family had handled the logistics of his death, quickly, quietly, without ever once asking Dottie if she wanted to be involved in any decision. At Marek's house after the funeral, While family members drifted through rooms making assessments, Dottie had stood in the kitchen with her hands folded in front of her and said, "Merrick always said the house would sort itself out. I suppose it will." I had thought about that sentence for months. Christmas Day was 11 degrees below zero in Duluth. I picked Dottie up at 8:30 in the morning. She was waiting in the lobby of her building wearing a green wool coat she'd owned since what she described as the late Ford administration, and she was carrying a tin of walnut cookies she'd made from a recipe her mother had taught her in a kitchen that no longer existed. In the car, she held the tin in her lap the entire 40 minutes. She looked out the window at the frozen fields. She said once quietly, "I haven't been in your mother's house since your grandfather's birthday. 2018. I said I knew. She said, "He would have liked that you came to get me." I drove. The first hour at my mother's house was the kind of performance that requires significant energy to maintain. Hellos. Hugs measured to precise degrees of warmth. Compliments on things, the centerpiece, the wreath, Celeste's new haircut. Dottie was installed in a chair near the fireplace and handed a glass of water and then, gradually, reliably, forgotten. I watched it happen. The way people's eyes passed over her. The way Bogdan told a story about a work trip and looked at every face in the room except hers. The way the cousins, teenagers not responsible for the architecture of their parents' indifference, drifted toward the television and away from the corner where she sat. I brought her a plate of food. I sat beside her. We talked quietly about the chess grandmaster, who had recently won something significant in Oslo. The tin of walnut cookies sat on the counter in the kitchen, unopened. Then my mother announced it was time for the family discussion. I felt the pressure in my sternum again. She meant the will. Mark's will. Which had apparently been a point of ongoing private discussion for months without my knowledge, and which my mother had decided to surface at Christmas dinner, in the presence of 12 people, in what I can only describe as a tactical decision. Merrick had died intestate. No will. My mother had been managing his estate as next of kin, and she had an accounting to present, and she presented it. The house had been sold in April. The proceeds, $214,000, had been divided among his 3 surviving children, my mother, Renata, and a third sibling named Theodore who lived in Vancouver and had sent a card. I looked at Dottie. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was watching my mother the way you watch something you have already finished grieving. I said, "What about Dottie?" My mother said Dottie wasn't a child of Marek's. She was a sister. Different legal standing. I said I understood the legal standing. I was asking about the decision. What happened next took approximately 90 seconds and resulted in me being told at volume in front of 11 witnesses that I was ungrateful, obsessed with a woman who isn't even blood, always like this, and that if I couldn't support the family's decisions I could spend Christmas somewhere else. Bogdan laughed. Not at anything specific. Just laughed. One of the cousins, a 16-year-old named Petra, stopped eating. She looked at her mother. Her mother looked at the table. Dottie stood up. She was 4'11" in her green wool coat, which she had never taken off. She said in a voice that did not waver, "I think I'd like to go home now." I said, "I'll take you." I got her coat. I got the tin of walnut cookies from the counter, unopened exactly as she had brought it. I got my keys. My mother said something as we left. I don't remember what. I was already at the door. We walked out into 11 degrees below zero, and the cold hit clean and immediate, and I thought, I chose this. This is not something that was done to me. I chose her. That's different. The logistics after Christmas were specific and manageable. I was already paying $1,140 a month for my one-bedroom apartment. I called my landlord in January and negotiated an addition to my lease. Dottie would be a second resident, no additional rent, in exchange for my agreeing to a 12-month renewal. He agreed. He had met Dottie once when she'd helped me move in, and she had brought him a jar of her mother's pickled cucumbers. He had mentioned the cucumbers approximately 4 times since. I rented a storage unit for $67 a month to fit what I had to move out of the bedroom to accommodate a twin bed and a dresser for Dottie. I moved to the pull-out sofa. This is not a complaint. The sofa was a $340 purchase from a second-hand shop and perfectly adequate. Dottie's monthly expenses, her medications, her portion of groceries, her phone, came to roughly $380 a month. I restructured my budget. I stopped eating out. I started making her borscht every Sunday, using her recipe slowly enough to get it right, and she would sit at the kitchen table and correct me with the particular patience of someone who has spent a lifetime knowing how things should be done. "The dough goes in when the heat is off," she said the first Sunday. "Otherwise it tastes like hot water with ambitions." She was adjusting to the pull-out sofa situation. My family made contact twice in the first 3 months. Once in February, my mother called to tell me that I was throwing my life away, and that I was welcome back at any time. The condition being that I acknowledged the decision about Marek's estate had been legally correct, which it had been, and let it go. The second time in March, Aunt Renata sent a card, an actual card physical through the mail, that said she hoped I was well and missed having me at family dinners. She did not mention Dottie. I did not respond to either. In April, Dottie found the card. She'd been reorganizing the kitchen. She reorganized things. It was one of her methods of making a space feel like hers, and she'd moved a stack of papers on the counter, and there it was. A Christmas card, red envelope, slightly water-stained. My grandfather's handwriting. My name on the front. She set it on the kitchen table without comment. I came home that evening and found it there. She was in the bedroom reading. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. The card sat in the center of the table like something that knew how to wait. If you're watching this and you're in the middle of a situation where you can't see the other side yet, subscribe so the rest of the story finds you. Finds you. Promise. I didn't open the card that night. I set my keys on the hook and walked to the window that faces the parking lot 3 floors below, and looked at the ice on the windshields and decided to wait. Dottie appeared in the kitchen doorway at some point. She said nothing. She put the kettle on. We drank tea and played 2 games of chess. She won both. And when she went back to bed, she touched my shoulder once briefly on her way past. That was enough. The letter from the attorney arrived on a Thursday in late May. It was addressed to me specifically, not to the estate, not to my mother, not to any of the family members who had managed Marek's affairs since January. To me by name at the apartment address, which I had never given anyone in my family. The attorney's name was Halverson. He had been Marek's attorney since 1991. He had been trying to reach the estate since February and had, apparently, encountered what he described in the letter as a consistent pattern of misdirection. He'd eventually found me through a chain I later understood. A neighbor of Marek's who remembered me from visits, who had my number from a time I'd fixed a gutter, who had passed it to Halverson's assistant. The letter said, there was a will. Not the intestate situation my mother had described. An actual, executed, witnessed, notarized will, dated 2019, which Halverson had prepared and held in his office for 4 years waiting for Marek's death. And my mother had known about Halverson. She had spoken to him in February. She had told him that the family was handling the estate directly, and that his services weren't needed. Halverson had, to his credit, not believed her. The meeting was set for June. Halverson's office. He recommended I bring whoever I wished. He had already notified my mother and Aunt Renata and Uncle Bogdan as interested parties, which was the legal term, and they would be present. I brought Dottie. I brought the Christmas card, still in its red envelope, still unopened because something told me to. Halverson's office smelled like old paper and central air conditioning. There was a conference table, dark wood, 8 chairs. My mother, Renata, and Bogdan were already seated when we arrived. Tomas was there too, Renata's husband, which had not been requested but was apparently permitted. No one greeted Dottie. Bogdan looked at me with an expression I recognized. The expression of a man recalibrating his assumptions about how much trouble he's in. My mother's face was very still. Renata was looking at the table. Halverson read the will. Marek Vasilchuk had left his estate to be divided as follows. 1/3 to his eldest daughter Irina, my mother. 1/3 to his daughter Renata. 1/3 to his sister Dorota Vasilchuk, known as Dottie. The house, sold in April for $214,000, should have generated $71,333 for Dottie. It had not. Halverson had the additional documentation. Marek had also maintained a savings account separate in Dottie's name, funded monthly since 2003, $200 a month for 16 years, that my mother had been unaware of because Merrick had been precise about keeping it separate. That account held $41,000 at the time of his death. Plus interest. Total owed to Dottie, $114,800, approximately. Plus Halverson's calculation of what the estate had cost to administer incorrectly, which added another $8,000 in legal fees to be borne by the parties who had misdirected him. My mother said, "He never told us." Her voice was loud and arrived before she appeared to decide to speak. Renata put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes went somewhere else. Bogdan's hands went flat on the table. Halverson said the will had been filed with the county in 2019 and was a matter of public record. My mother could have found it. Anyone could have found it. I looked at my mother then. I want to be honest about this. I saw something cross her face that I recognized as human. Not guilt exactly. Fear. The specific fear of a person who has believed for years that a thing they did was invisible and has just learned it wasn't. I noted it. I did not use it. That's not why we were there. I put the Christmas card on the table. Still sealed. Still in its red envelope. I said, "He mailed this before he died. He knew he was dying. He sent it to me because I was the one who visited." The postmark is September 2022. 4 months before his death. I opened it. Inside, in Marek's handwriting, was the name Halverson and a phone number. Nothing else. No message. Just the name and number written in his precise old country script, because he had known what was coming and he had known who to trust. Dottie beside me looked at the card. She said very quietly, "He always said the house would sort itself out." I looked at my mother. I said, "It sorted itself out." The legal process took 4 months. Halverson filed the petition in July. The estate was reopened. The sale of the house had been properly executed, so the proceeds were traced and clawed back from the portions that had already been distributed. Renata settled without contest in August. She paid back her third plus a portion of fees and sent a cashier's check without comment. My mother contested. Her attorney filed 2 motions. Both were denied. She settled in September with penalties. Bogdan had received no direct inheritance. He was a son-in-law, not a beneficiary, so there was nothing legal to claw back from him. That particular justice was of a different, quieter kind, and it arrived in its own time through no action of mine. The total received by Dottie, after fees and the process of settlement, was $109,400. Halverson's office wire transferred it to an account in her name that I had helped her open at a credit union in May, in the optimistic period between receiving the letter and the meeting, when I had decided to believe good things were coming. I had one conversation with my mother before the settlement finalized. She called me. I answered because I had decided in advance that I would offer this exactly once. I told her that if she wanted to acknowledge what had happened, not to me, to Dottie, I would consider it and I would ask Dottie to consider it and we could see what was possible. She said, "I thought she had no legal standing." I said, "That's not what I asked." She didn't say anything else. I waited 30 seconds. Then I said goodbye and I meant it. Renata sent another card. Physical, through the mail. It was addressed to Dottie. I gave it to Dottie and left the room. I don't know what was in it. I didn't ask. Dottie is still in the apartment. The $109,400 is in her account, mostly untouched. She added a small supplement to her monthly income, enough to cover her own portion of the expenses, which she insisted on. She bought a new chess set, weighted pieces wood board, and it sits on the kitchen table in the corner of the window that faces the parking lot. The window we both look out of. Her when she reads in the morning and me when I come home at night and need a moment before I'm ready to speak. I still make the borscht on Sundays. I add the dill after the heat is off. Dottie doesn't have to correct me anymore. Last Sunday she read me a sentence from her notebook, one she'd written down years ago, she said, from a book she'd found in Marek's apartment after he died. She read it slowly, the way she always reads things she wants me to carry. I wrote it down. That's the inheritance. Not the money, which was always hers. Not the legal victory, which was always coming. The notebook. The sentences. The knowledge of when to add the dill. My grandfather knew who would answer the phone on a Sunday. He knew who to send the card to. He was right. If there's someone in your life who's been quietly written off, call them this week. Not a text, a call. Tell them the chess grandmaster won something, or ask about the recipe, or just ask how Tuesday was. Sometimes that's the whole thing. Sometimes that's enough to let them know the house will sort itself out. If this story stayed with you, share it. Leave a comment with one name, just a first name, of someone you're going to call. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you in the next one.